and I'm thrilled to welcome you here tonight to the 15th Annual Pat Reif Lecture. Before we hear from our special lecturer tonight, we've got a few preliminaries, and I just wanted to say a few words of welcome before we get rolling here. I was at the University of Notre Dame last week. I was lecturing, and while I was there, I had the privilege to sit in on a class that was being taught by Dennis McDonough, who served as the Chief of Staff to President Barack Obama during the second term of his administration. And McDonough spoke with the students there about the politics of hope. And he talked about hope not just as a kind of cheap political slogan, but as an outlook and an orientation that would actually shape the way that we go about our work in this world, including in the hard work of politics. And tonight, in preparation for tonight, I was reviewing some of Dr. Aquino's writings. And I was really impressed by something that I encountered from her from a couple of years ago, 2 years ago exactly, in October 2015, where she said the following: "Rather than pessimism or hopelessness, I declare to you that the deep voices from the South, the global South, are active and alive in today's world, and that there are reasons for hope. In the current century, new transformative processes have emerged encompassing social and religious actors, mobilization initiatives, and theological epistemologies, strengthening together the affirmation that another world is possible. Intervention for the advancement of human dignity, human rights, social justice, sustainable communities, and solidarity, undertaken by a pluralism of religious actors, is taking place around the world, and this is a powerful reason for hope." So given all that's happened in the world since 2015, I needn't say more. I'm tremendously gratified to welcome Dr. Aquino, who is an embodiment of hope and a speaker of truth, as our guest here at the 15th Annual Pat Reif Lecture. Her message that we're going to hear tonight couldn't be more timely. I'm very grateful on behalf of Claremont Graduate University to the entire Pat Reif Committee for making this possible. We're so pleased with the partnership and look forward to 15 and 50 and as many more years as we can. And until injustice and inequality are subjects only for historians like myself to study, we will continue to sponsor events like this that ask the deepest questions of who we are and what we value. But nobody came to hear from me, so let me simply say to Dr. Aquino, on behalf of all of us here at Claremont Graduate University, welcome. We look forward to hearing from you tonight. So, it's my privilege to turn it over to Ann Heyman, who will introduce more about the Pat Reif Memorial Lecture. Again, thank you all for being here tonight.
Good evening. Oh, really? Let's try that one more time. Good evening. Good evening. All right. I hope you're all wide awake. Not too much wine now. We'll still be here later. All right. Well, I am indeed Ann Heyman. It is delightful to be with you this evening, and I'm so thrilled to have all of you here for this wonderful lecture. This has been a great series. It really has. And I'm thrilled to be part of the, we call ourselves the planning team or whatever, the Pat Reif lecture team. Yeah. Anyway, how many of you knew Pat? Oh my gosh, look at this. All right, she truly was. I would put her into sainthood easily without much debate at all. Back in 1980, I started a program here in Southern California called the Mary Magdalene Project. It was for women who had been involved in street prostitution and their kids. Now, I know Mary Magdalene was not. We're not even going to get into that. Okay. Anyway, I would guess 2 years into this, trying to figure out what I thought I knew about prostitution and sex trafficking and what I was learning about it. And, oh, are you having trouble hearing me? Oh dear. Okay. Can we turn it up?
Can you just speak into the microphone so it's kind of louder?
Louder. Is that better? All right. Getting a thumbs up. Anyway. So, of course, my only recourse was to find books to read, and that was not necessarily all that productive. And my dear friend, Bear Reif, whom I suspect some of you also know, came to me one day and said, there's a woman named Pat Reif at Immaculate Heart College, and she's going to start a program, a master's degree in feminist spirituality. And Bear says, I think I'm interested. Are you? And so the next thing I know, we're sitting across the desk from Pat Reif, signing our name on a dotted line to be in this wonderful program that was going to meet on weekends. We were going to sit at the feet of all these wonderful feminist theologians. And let's see, I think it was 1992, Pat finally came to me and told me I had to graduate. I couldn't hang around any longer. I'd come back and take classes, but anyway, it was a godsend. It was wonderful. It was amazing. It truly was. And I met wonderful people in the class, and of course got to study with other amazing people as well. And Pat herself was an inspiration. Oh my goodness. If you look on the inside of your program, you'll find that did you do this? Janice Post did this. She's divided her life into Pat Reif as Sister Richard and Pat Reif as activist and feminist. And I only knew her as an activist. And she was amazing. She got herself arrested. She was willing to put her life where her theology was and her hope and her faith were. And all of that came through loud and clear as she put together the program that I participated in. She is amazing. We have a video. Yeah, we have a video. And it tells a bit about her life and her work. She really was just absolutely amazing. And I think those of you who have met her, who knew her, can attest to that as well. She was a wonderful tennis player. And I think one of her greatest accomplishments was that she stopped smoking. Probably about 30 times, but bless her heart. I once told her that the women in my program had told me that learning or quitting smoking was harder than quitting heroin. And she looked at me and she put her hands on my shoulder and she says, I believe it. So bless her heart, she was just truly a wonderful, wonderful woman and had a great idea as far as the program was concerned. So anyway, the video is next. All right.
Seamless person in terms of her work and her life.
So Pat has been, for me, one of the most important influences in my life.
Pat Reif, of course, is an old friend of mine. I know her back from when she was teaching at a college in the 60s.
She was a great friend and mentor and a wonderful colleague in the field of feminist studies and religion.
She embodied excellence in everything she did. She had just been a woman ahead of her time. Of having her as a college professor in philosophy and having not had a lot of exposure to such a topic, except in the mission to some extent. I was she stretched your mind. She would never let you stay with your work. You had to go to another level.
Pat was one of those inveterate organizers who was always able to find a way, whether it was to get resources together, to raise money, to bring people together. And she was a very, very important person.
Impelled by hope and a growing sense of anger at the bonds of injustice. Like prophets before her, Pat worked tirelessly all of her life to loosen those bonds of injustice.
Long before it was popular to be with the farm workers and the people who were immigrants in California, long before it was popular to be on the picket line or to be opposing a war here or there that the U.S. was waging, Pat Reif was there.
When you work for poverty, you're also working for peace. Okay. So what is Pat Reif's legacy in women's studies? Pat Reif was particularly invested, she was the dean of that program on women's studies, feminist spirituality. And that was a very important program. She headed that. I don't remember now how many years, but certainly a number of years. And I used to teach for that. So I would come out from, I guess, Chicago was where I was at that point. And I would give, let's say, a weekend intensive or something like that. And she, I think, was a very important program because many, many people went through it. They were really shaped by that program for an ongoing career in issues about women and social justice. And so I think that program of feminist spirituality and all the people who went through it and who carried on that legacy in their own lives is her major legacy in that area.
Pat was tireless in her work for that program. She came to visit me at Water to look at bibliography and to talk about the kinds of people who would be useful as mentors and professors in that.
But the feminist spirituality program was the outgrowth of a major conversion to feminism that Pat had experienced. The material was no longer just an intellectual discipline. Now it was a matter of life and death for women. She had suddenly understood the connection between the patriarchal system and the oppression of women and many men and the earth itself. And it was her mission to undo the patriarchal system. Theologians and ethicists of the day to show that feminism was way beyond women gaining equal access to men, getting equal pay for equal work, etc. It was about having a broad enough perspective so that one is aware that everyone suffers in a patriarchal system and that any oppression is immoral. increased in the last 10 years. I know that this was made possible in large part because of Pat's efforts early on in the Women's Ordination Conference. These women are a part of her legacy.
Actually, I have a very sad memory, but it's a very poignant one and very touching. I stayed with Pat a few times here when she moved into Pilgrim Place, and then I was teaching up at the GTU in Berkeley when I heard that she began to suffer from this illness, which of course really brought her life to an end all too swiftly. And at one point I called her up, we were talking over the phone, and she said to me in such a kind of poignant voice, something like, I'm just not ready to leave this beautiful world. And so I just remembered her voice, I can almost hear it in my head, her voice saying that, I'm just not ready to leave this beautiful world. And that was a very poignant moment that I think about when I think about Pat Reif.
We honor you, our most beloved sister, for a race well run to the end, and in the midst of our sorrow at your loss, we trust that although you are not where you were before, you are now wherever we are.
Let me just welcome Nicola Denzi-Lewis to the podium to introduce our speaker for this evening.
Thank you, Janice. Good evening, everybody. My name is Nicola Denzi-Lewis, and I'm the Margot L. Goldsmith Chair in Women's Studies in Religion here at CGU. I should say the new Margot L. Goldsmith Chair, but I'm still wet behind the ears here. And may I join my colleagues and Dean Patrick Mason in welcoming you all to CGU and telling you how pleased I am to see you all here tonight. It's an honor to host the Pat Reif Lecture here. And although I didn't know her at all, I think I feel her spirit live on here in the community and in the work of the women who have really been striving to honor her vision. So it's very wonderful to be here to see that. And it also makes me so pleased to be able to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. María Pilar Aquino. Let's see how her work and career embody what was important to Pat Reif. María Pilar Aquino was born in Ixtlan del Rio, Mexico, to a family of modest means who taught her early to be an activist committed to bettering the lives of others, a commitment and vision that has guided her entire academic career. She received her PhD at the Pontifical University of Salamanca, Spain in 1991, and a licentiate in theology at the Instituto Teológico de Estudios Superiores ITES in Mexico City in 1984. Her career has truly been global, beyond guest lectures and appointments from Los Angeles to South Korea. She was telling us some about this before. She holds an honorary degree from the University of Helsinki, Finland. She's also been a visiting scholar at Harvard Divinity School and at the Eusebio Francisco Quino S.J. Professor of Faith and Culture at the Universidad Iberoamericana in Mexico City. Among her numerous accomplishments, Dr. Aquino has served as the first woman president of the Academy of Catholic Hispanic / Latino Theologians of the United States from 1993 to 1994. She serves on numerous boards of theological journals, bringing her expertise and perspective on feminist theologies, social ethics, and religious peacebuilding studies. Dr. Aquino is perhaps best known as an accomplished and much respected scholar of liberation and feminist theologies. In 1997, she received the Virgil Elizondo Award from the Academy of Catholic Hispanic Theologians for her outstanding contribution to Latina feminist theology. Her work reflects her deep commitment to social justice and constructive change, and there's a lot of it. She has authored over 50 books and articles to date. You can see some of her bibliography there on the program, including a number of single-authored books and 2 co-edited with Harvard Divinity School. Was it 2 or 3? 3, that's what I thought. There's another one on there. 3 co-edited with Harvard Divinity School's Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza, who was also a Pat Reif lecturer here at CGU. And so copies of at least one of these co-edited, co-authored books will be available for purchase and for Dr. Aquino to sign immediately after this lecture. So I hope you will take advantage of this opportunity to have a signed copy of one of her books. Dr. Aquino comes to us today from the University of San Diego, where she is Associate Professor of Theology and Religious Studies. Professor. Yay! As well as Associate Director of the Center for the Study of Popular Catholicism. And tell them to update that website. And where she also teaches courses on feminist and liberation theologies. Students speak glowingly of her. One, for instance, has called her courses the most inspirational, heartfelt, and religiously transforming courses at USD. So we so much look forward to being inspired by your words tonight. So having literally drawn through a wall of fire to get here today, I know you will all join me in giving our most warm welcome to Dr. María Pilar Aquino.
We have a bit of order here. Thank you so much, Professor Nancy Lewis, for your welcoming introduction. I also want to express my appreciation to Dean Mason for his words at the opening of the lecture. He did take time to read and to hear some of the presentations I have made. Thank you. I was so impressed. I also want to say that I am so grateful with Professor Karen Torgerson, because she wrote to me in 2015, 2 years ago. She wanted to secure that I will give her an affirmative response to her invitation. So she did write to me for this lecture, and I'm grateful to her. The first lecturer in the past Reif Memorial Lecture was Mary Hunt, as we just saw in the video. A brilliant scholar and a good friend. I'm glad to mention that she sends warm greetings to you all, with special loving wishes to Rosemary Redford-Ruther. Rosemary wanted to be here, was a last-minute decision, she couldn't make it, but her is here. So, thank you, her. Mary Hunt continues to honor the legacy of Pat Reif, who, in Mary's words, quote, lived by her own lights, with justice and peace at the fore, end of quote. I'm so honored and grateful for the opportunity you are giving me to share with you some concerns and understandings about the contribution of feminist theology to overcome violence against the women. When I proposed the topic for this event, I was aware of the global magnitude of sexual violence, exploitation, and abuse endured by a myriad of women and children around the world. I was also aware that we have not done enough to end this pervasive situation. But I never thought that armed violence will bring so much tragedy and desolation as it did a few days ago in Las Vegas, so close to home. So much unjust suffering inflicted on innocent families and communities reinforced my conviction that religions, theologies, and churches can no longer neglect active involvement in the search for alternatives to the madness of the current societal setting. Last year, it was Orlando, Florida. 2 years ago, it was San Bernardino, and the list is endless. According to credible online databases, there have been 273 armed violence incidents in the U.S. in 2017 alone. And this might be an underestimate. There were 383 mass shootings in 2016 and 372 in 2015. A fact that cannot be denied exposes that U.S. is disproportionately by far the global leader of gun violence. This, not counting the myriad of innocent civilians killed by U.S.-sponsored bullets and drone strikes in the past 10 years, including Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, Libya, Somalia, Uganda, Syria, Cameroon, and now the North Korea crisis. Something is very wrong. If Pat Reif will be with us today, I will not be surprised, but rather expecting that she will establish a program for feminist peace building and conflict transformation. No doubt that she was a woman of wisdom, intellect, and compassion, deeply committed to global justice. From her advocacy of Christian holiness, she did advocate Christian holiness, to feminist spirituality and her activism in the anti-nuclear movement, she dedicated her life to foster women's capacities for constructive transformation in both society and religion. During my time at Mount St. Mary's University from 1985 to 1993, I had the blessing of meeting with her several times as she invited me to speak about Latina feminist theology at the Immaculate Heart College Center. That was many years ago, but her charism and vision continue to inspire many of us today. With this lecture, I'm seeking to pay homage to her and encourage you all to keep alive her values and commitment to end all forms of destructive conflict and violence. The theme that I am proposing to address gives me the opportunity to explore the motivations and the purpose of the work that we share in common. This is an endeavor that is done not in isolation, but one in which we engage together. Here, I take the liberty of speaking in the plural, the we, the plural, because I'm working with the understanding that in one way or another, you and I inform consciousness and values with some type of framework of religiously based feminist understanding. There are many theories, there are many approaches, there is the list of frameworks is long, but feminism is there, kind of a base understanding. So if we are here, it's because we have some type of sensitivity, some type of openness of heart to those perspectives, and that is why I speak in the plural, and that's why we're here. In the pursuit of justice, we are not alone, but rather interconnected in all parts of the world. Although my approach to the presented theme is limited, I wish to propose that the relationship between violence and liberation is constructive transformation. I am interested in asserting that in the immediate context of today's world, constructive transformation displays the purpose of a feminist theology of liberation that embraces compatibility of purpose with the contemporary social movements for global justice that flourish today around the world. In the first part of this paper, I present the topic of violence against the women as a global problem of health and as a violation of human rights. In the second part, I focus my reflection on the search for alternatives for a different world as a shared feminist purpose. In the third and final part, I intend to give greater visibility to a feminist understanding of liberation in view of supporting active intervention for building just societal systems and relationships. I want to begin by saying that I understand feminist theology as a conceptual practice of critical thought that, informed by religious worldviews of liberation, focuses on contribution to the radical transformation of structures, behaviors, and worldviews rooted on domination and violence, and it wants to support and promote alternatives for the actualization of just social systems and relationships. Along with the dynamics of the global justice movement today, feminist theologians involved in this movement declare together that another world is possible. As a global social movement, feminist theology brings together social and religious actors and mobilizes religious resources for intervention in the constructive transformation of societies, cultures, and religions by providing new paths of thinking and living in terms of emancipation. Feminist theological perspectives emerge from a pluralism of social contexts and develop thematic contexts from diverse religious worldviews and experiences. Feminist liberation theology finds roots in the practices of social and religious actors committed to values and goals aimed at social change for justice, peace, dignity, freedom, and life abundant shared together. As aligned with the values and purpose emanating from the great religious traditions of the world, this theology contributes to make religion a motivating force for constructive change. And this is important to keep in mind. Religion must stop being a mechanism of oppression, a mechanism of violence, a mechanism of subordination. Religion must become a motivating force, a social force for constructive social change. The two premises that best declare the compatibility between feminist theology and the various religions of the world are two, in my perspective. First, the shared conviction that God's purpose is one of holiness of life for the world and humanity, and the affirmation of hope as a foretaste of new realities in the present, where the glory of God is manifested in all splendor. All religions will agree with those two premises. These premises sustain the practices of the living faith of those individuals and communities whose existence is infused by religious views of liberation. When it comes to towering figures in feminist theology, covering topics of global reach connected to the liberation paradigm, Rosemary Redford Ruther forever holds centrality. Many in this audience here know Rosemary's work infinitely better than I, but I believe that you will agree with me in recognizing that her contributions are marked by concern for finding alternatives to overcome misogynism, patriarchy, and colonialism, so that society, religion, and the academy become shaped by worldviews of liberation. The next topic is a matter of health and human rights. From the outset, I must acknowledge that the theme, overcoming violence, embodying liberation, is broad and complex. But everything appears to indicate that collectively and theologically, we are facing an issue deeply linked to health and human rights. On the one hand, both the theories of violence and the relationship of violence and religion have been extensively investigated from multiple fields of inquiry, including the social, political, and the neurobiological sciences. Many scholars find that those relationships are perplexing and disturbing because historically, while in the name of God or appealing to religion, certain social groups have sanctified violence by perpetrating countless acts of annihilation and destruction, others have inhibited violence by performing innumerable acts of compassion and reconciliation. In general, the large majority of those studies have tried to unravel this relationship, have sought to understand the causes and mechanisms of violence in order to devise responses to reduce, predict, prevent, intervene, and change social patterns of violence. An insight useful for the purpose of this lecture is that violent interaction and violence against women in particular are understood as a global public health problem and as a violation of women's human rights and fundamental freedoms. To this point, I did put together the handout that you have in your hands. We are not going to read this handout naturally. It's long, it will take us the whole lecture, but I thought that you will be interested in having the sources. So you have the documents, you have the websites, you have the image of the documents that I'm using to support my lecture. I just want to say that there is one document that I want to recommend in particular because it is taken to be normative when it comes to the study of violence. And that is the World Health Organization document defining violence, power, relationships. It is the second one. It is the second one in the first page of the handout. This document is considered to be normative today. It is used by every international organization, governments, policymakers, and so forth when it comes. It's a beautiful, wonderful, the most comprehensive document. This was released in the year 2002, but continues to be so valid and useful today. I strongly recommend that you take a look at this document, every chapter, the different types of violence, the causes and everything. And one so important fact is that they frame violence and violence against the women as an issue of human rights. The World Health Organization it has developed programs and other type of publications addressing this issue. When it comes to the UN Women also has produced a significant amount of literature in this regard. The International Committee of the Red Cross also has regular resources on the topic. So it appears that through the reading of this document that the all international organizations, they all agree in recognizing that violence against the women is a global and a systemic reality. It must be framed within an understanding of human rights and as a problem of public health. And that's important to recognize simply because in the theological arena or in the religious studies field, we are seldom trained to access this type of resources. In the writings and research and so forth, we seldom connect with this type of things, so we think that we are inventing the wheel. And that is not true. We must work better with the work of those international organizations in our understandings and approaches. So, in its 1993 Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against the Women, the UN declares that, quote, violence against the women is a manifestation of historically unequal power relations between men and women, which have led to domination over and discrimination against the women by men, and to the prevention of the full advancement of women, and that violence against women is one of the crucial social mechanisms by which women are forced into subordinate positions compared with men. That was 1993. Feminist theologians and others beyond are aware that sexual violence also affects men, both young and old, as illustrated by the pervasiveness of clergy pedophilia in the Catholic Church and in other churches as well. But whether in times of war or in times of peace, social reality shows a wide disproportion regarding sexual violence perpetrated against the women, which leaves in them lasting problems of sexual and reproductive health, as well as physical and mental harm. In consistency with international organizations, feminist studies in the Academy have raised aspects of relevance to feminist theologies. I mention only a few. First, that violence against women must be understood within the framework of human rights and health. Second, that such violence is preventable, not inevitable, and can be eradicated through education and intervention in collective action. Third, that religions and theologies, while they have maintained the values and teaching that legitimize such violence, now face the challenge of working for women's integrity of health and human rights. The International Committee of the Red Cross asserts with great force and persuasion that, quote, sexual violence is prohibited. It is preventable. This must be recognized and realized. It is important to reiterate whenever and wherever possible that sexual violence is unacceptable and not inevitable, end of quote. The terms prohibited and preventable appear in bold in the Red Cross document, bold, namely calling attention to those terms. And for me, it is important to bring those statements to the religious field because I have not seen ever a document from the Vatican saying something similar. The leaders of religions, I'm speaking in the plural, religions in the Christian churches have failed, I believe, to keep up with the developments of society. Civil society is working this way, and they are working this way. They appear to go in parallel, and they refuse to listen what civil society is saying. If the churches will adopt and enact and apply and develop capacities in our communities about these perspectives, we will be in a much different situation. For feminist theologians from the global south, the concern to engage theologically the realities of violence affecting women in our different contexts has been a continuing component of our shared interest and work. Mexican feminist theologian María del Carmen Servitje asserts that, quote, feminist theology in all its expressions is a critical theology because it seeks to expose the injustices done against women in both society and churches and proposes an alternative vision, end of quote. In agreement with this statement, it is important for me to mention and recognize that with the support of the Women's Commission of the Ecumenical Association of Third World Theologians, feminist theology developed from Asia, Africa, in Latin America, and the Caribbean has contributed to the shaping of those alternative feminist visions, beginning with the affirmation of the right we have to exist with integrity, to think critically, to act courageously, and to live without violence. From the decade of the 1980s, this commission has convened several international congresses that have given us the opportunity to examine and analyze the various forms of violence against the women, as well as to affirm the necessity to make a shift from anger and indignation to the articulation of a feminist theological work that will contribute to its eradication. Possibly, the work best known in the English language is the book published in 1996. The title of this book is Women Resisting Violence, Spirituality for Life. This is a collective book in which feminist theologians from many parts of the world contribute. In this work, we collectively asserted as follows, quote, we who are committed to the struggle of resisting, changing, and transforming the structures of violence and domination have come together from all the corners of the world to explore critically and to reflect theologically on the discourses of violence, cultural, domestic, economic, military, corporeal, ecological, and symbolic spiritual. Starting with the sacredness and dignity of every woman, we have not only analyzed the structures of violence, but also shared experiences and practices of empowerment in order to develop a spirituality for life that is sustained by the vision of justice, self-determination, and well-being for all of creation. Our theological discourses and practices provide an alternative analysis, vision, and practice, and anticipate the transformations we seek. End of quote. This statement came out of a gathering that we had in Costa Rica, 1990s. I was there. and I participated in the drafting of the final document. That's why I know well the document. By making reference, Puilan Shung Hyun Kyun was there, Elizabeth Schuster was there, several of the feminist theologians that you know were there at this event. By making reference to this work, I simply wish to acknowledge that feminist theologians from the Global South have been personally and collectively sensitive to the realities of violence that affect many of us. I am aware that collectively we recognize that sexual violence has entered with devastating force on our families, communities, and in our own lives. As members of families and communities, whether named or not, we are personally affected by such violence. We had the opportunity to share many of these experiences during the Inter-American Symposium of Feminist Theologians held again in Costa Rica in 2008 under the title Broken Bodies, Sacred Lives, Intercultural Feminist Theology on Women's Human Dignity and Sexuality. We have not been able to produce a book based on that topic, but given the developments of society and the recognition of increased levels of violence in all its forms, we are revisiting the project in the hope of producing a work in the upcoming months. Although with many limitations and deficiencies, borrowing the expression coined in reference to the movement of the Colombian indigenous women in their struggles for the defense of their land in the early 20th century, that was 1927, I dare to say that, overcoming all kinds of barriers, we feminist theologians have moved, unidas como una bandada de águilas furiosas, united like a flock of furious eagles, to break our silences, to reject our complicities, and to intervene courageously in the social and religious processes seeking liberation from violence. Presented as a story of a rebellion, that same expression, united as like a flock of furious eagles, expression was used by Carmen Lora, a Peruvian psychoanalyst, in reference to the women's movement in South America in their historical struggles to free themselves from oppressive realities. In my view, as we gather together this evening, the event itself comes to strengthen the transformative purpose of feminist theology in a common search for alternatives. With this, I move on to the next topic, a shared feminist purpose. The immediate context of the world exposes a global civil society mobilized at the beat of plural social movements that have emerged to declare rejection of the dominant social order that is producing devastation of life and inciting violence everywhere. So today you see people once again appropriating the space of the streets, the public plaza, and that is everywhere around the world. The most impressive thing that happened after the earthquake, Mexico City, I'm sure you saw this on the news, was the intervention of young people. Women and everyone, men, women, and young people, but it was the youth. The students were out there in every street, racing, picking up stones, helping people. The same is true for what happened at in Tunis. For the Arab Spring is rooted on that. I was in Tunis twice, and you saw that everywhere. everywhere. Spain, Catalonia, these days, big time, by the thousands, or people out there, organized or disorganized, but largely in an organized way, taking on the streets. Washington, Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego, everywhere, our campuses, activities everywhere. Civil society is awake. I don't know about the leadership of the churches, but civil society is awake. It's an opportunity for us, educators. The immediate context, again, exposes a global civil society mobilized. The social movements today are standing strong to build networks and affirm collective action for alternatives leading to a different world. Both in the US and around the globe, the massive marches, public protests, boycott actions, civil disobedience, the rise of transnational groups, and the activism of a broad spectrum of social actors serve to illustrate a dynamic of revitalization of the world's longings for a just and free social order. The people everywhere are standing up, raising their voice, multiplying their rejection of exclusion and authoritarianism, defying political and religious fundamentalism, fighting against tyranny and hierarchies, interacting in the public arena, and strengthening the social body with resistance, rebellion, and militancy. Those of us who come from the 70s and the 80s, those of us who were active in the social movements of the civil rights and the women's movements and in my case, the liberation movements in Latin America, including some of the revolutionary groups. I was a nun at that time, and we were always supporting. Yeah, I was a nun, 10 years. And proud of it. Never regret it, not one bit. So we were there, so it appears that what was perceived to be during the 1990s was called the lost decade. People were tired, there were little movement, even in the classroom we felt that something, the students are not so active and intelligent as they used to be. Well, those times are back. People, the new generations are emerging, new sensitivities are emerging, new visions are there. I think that we are so blessed by living through these times. Scholars who study those social processes point out the lack of a singular definition of what civil society is. But the analyst of conflict in civil society, Martina Fisher, acknowledges a consensus that civil society is, quote, the arena of voluntary collective actions around shared interests, purposes, and values, end of quote. Civil society enjoys autonomy in relation to the state apparatus. On her part, feminist sociology of Iranian origin, Valentin Moghadam, points out that civil society, quote, provides citizens with an alternative site of engagement and resources outside and presumably beyond the clutches of the state and the market, end of quote, where social actors consciously and deliberatively establish communication, cooperation, and organization. It is important to take into account that within civil society, participation is also found of social movements that support goals in favor of right-wing extremism, political and religious fundamentalism, militarism, authoritarian regimes, and militants that instigate antagonistic social relationships and divided communities. And that is what we have also seen, what appears to be the growth of racism in society. Armed groups, the neo-Nazi groups, all armed, and a variety of right-wing groups. All of them active in civil society. The remarkable ambivalence of civil society comes from the characteristics that define the movements. Experts in the study of social movements point out that social movements are based on 3 or more of the following characteristics. Quote, collective or joint action, change-oriented goals or claims, some extra or non-institutional collective action, some degree of organization, and some degree of temporal continuity. Thus, end of quote, thus the purpose pursued and the motivational values of action appear as criteria for discerning social movements. And that is why we must be clear about social movements that work for social justice and constructive social change. Clearly, due to its interest in the constructive transformation of systems of violence and exclusion, a feminist theology of liberation establishes links of communication and networks of cooperation with the social movements that Mogadam calls the global justice movement. She also calls them the globalization from below movement. Along the same lines, while Boaventura de Sousa Santos, a prominent sociologist from Portugal, uses the expression counter-hegemonic movements, the influential feminist sociologist from Peru, Gina Vargas, uses the expression contestation or contestational social movements. It was difficult for me to translate this into English. She calls them movimientos sociales contestatarios. Movimiento social contestatario. For the word contestatario, you cannot find the equivalent in the English language. So I'm translating it as contestation or contestational social movements. Gina Vargas is widely acknowledged as a pioneer and a major figure of contemporary Latin American feminist theory and movement. And I should say that some of these scholars that I am quoting here have been working together with the feminist theologians from the Global South. So we work with sociologists, political analysts, scholars in other fields. In the context of the World Social Forum, within which the World Forum on Theology and Liberation was born, the global justice movement has established a consensus about avoiding and evading violence in its various forms of militancy and social practice. Taking into account this consensus from the multiple spaces promoted by the Forum, the social movements for emancipation that emerge from civil society display a multiplicity of initiatives, but they all share in common the task of combating that which they consider to be the root cause of systemic injustice and exclusion. From the standpoint of actors at the Forum, it is understood that the intersection and mutual reinforcement of neoliberal capitalism, colonialism, and patriarchy, all three interstructured systems cement the hegemony of a complex global system that spreads social disparities, hierarchies, unequal exchanges, wars, injustices, and violations of human rights that reach the global citizens. Whatever happens in the US has an effect in South Africa. That system, even with its historical background and adaptations, has also been identified as the root cause of the various forms of impoverishment and violence that severely affect women. Various feminist scholars, such as Gina Vargas, Brazilian sociologist María José Rosado Núñez, as well as Cuban-American feminist political scientist Sonia Alvarez and Valentin Mogadam, they all agree on how or in what ways the dominant global system impacts women's lives. These ways include, among others, first, the vulnerability and instability of the nation states in the face of banging global markets, finance and trade, all controlled by the geopolitical north. Second, the imposed structural adjustments and austerity measures with significant cuts to social policies and public services. 3. The erosion of citizenship and deterioration of the living conditions of the population. 4. The uprooting and migration of entire populations seeking to escape misery, violence, or environmental disasters. Fifth, the feminization of poverty. And finally, the increasing tendency for women to become heads of indigent households. Under the current global system, violence affects women in simultaneous, interrelated, and multiplicative forms. The idea that we are interdependent in the global home, what does it mean? The justification of violence against women as a mechanism of power and subordination is also rooted in the fundamentalist and authoritarian component of religions, particularly with its rhetorical mechanisms for control of the body and the sexuality of women. For our shared theological endeavors in both the global north and the south, feminist theologians are called to adopt as an ethical and religious imperative and as a common denominator, a collective commitment for the eradication of violence against the women. With its many voices and its anchorage in diverse religious traditions, this theology can and should continue mobilizing the resources that the religions of the world provide to support work in the interest of building social systems and relationships free from violence. This is a process within which, as Servige Montul asserts, feminist theologians engage a labor which is at the same time personal and communal for one's own transformation and for social change. And I move to the last part of my paper, Liberation for Justice. Ignacio Yacuría, a pioneer and a major scholar of liberation theology in Latin America. He's also a martyr of the massacre of the Jesuits in El Salvador, 1989. He asserted clearly and directly, quote, "The primary goal of liberation is justice," end of quote. Yacuría is known as the philosopher behind the liberation theology movement. He was the president, the rector of the Catholic University in San Salvador, a personal advisor of Bishop Romero. So when the massacre took place, they were after him. They wanted to kill his mind. Iyacuría understands that justice involves every person, because justice means that everyone is, has, and is given not what is supposed to own or to possess, but what is due to one because of one's condition as a human. From the standpoint of the Christian tradition, there is no liberation without justice, or salvation without liberation, because liberation is a tangible manifestation of salvation. According to Iyacuría, because, quote, actualizing liberation is a necessary condition for the actualization of salvation, end of quote. Because of that, the best service the religions can provide to the world is that of using their social force in favor of liberation. The understanding of liberation as a process guided by and directed towards the goal of justice is a distinctive category in all theologies of liberation, and is a principle of interpretation shared by these theologies, including feminist theology. In these theologies, the connection between liberation, salvation, and transformation for justice expresses not only an alternative way of doing theology by linking living faith with praxis, but also a clear awareness of the ethical and the political implications of religious faith. The positioning of feminist theology for liberation by building justice entails the involvement of each person, personally and in community, in social movements for change, from which one learns to see and to verbalize new visions and values that come to enrich the content of theology. Worldviews infused by liberation to reach goals of justice flourish best in one's imagination through the actual involvement in the processes of constructive change. To communicate this idea in positive terms, it is through this involvement that one discovers the grace and action of God present in the world. This is a religious conviction that enables one to see the absence of God's reign when and where injustice exists, and affirm God's reign when and where justice brings life and liberation. Also, translated into courageous intervention, this religious conviction affirms the religious, the ethical, and the political imperative for constructive transformation. Christian faith becomes a source of strength and motivation to carve tangible possibilities for liberation from violence. Possibilities are not born out of emptiness, but they are built with dedication, effort, strength, resilience, vision, and courage. And that's why we're here. We were talking because my connections with the IHMs and the CSJs for so many years. We met so many years ago. You know what? Here we are. Still fighting, resisting, believing that things can change. Here we are. There is no more sacred and material space which makes tangible the divine presence and grace than a human body living in fullness one's own dignity and rights. The premise of this understanding is that, from a religious perspective, God's relationship with humanity takes place in the body, human. And this is an indisputable premise. Such fullness and dignity in rights includes the bodies marked by a variety of the so-called disabilities which defy the conventional understandings of a healthy and a beautiful body. The body of women emerges as a site of struggle, positioned in a continuum of resistance, solidarity, hope, and liberation, inhibiting the blindness of cultural and religious fundamentalisms. Many years ago, Rosemary Redford stated that, quote, "A major challenge to the Catholic Church has to do with sexual morality and the status of women," end of quote. This challenge continues to be present today. With her customary brilliance, Rosemary affirmed that the conservative groups of church and society, quote, "want a woman's body to be at the disposal of her husband, nature, and God, who determine her destiny," end of quote. She asserted that for women to appropriate self-determination, one needs to overthrow the material and ideological base of the entire hierarchy of male power over women. And by all means, promote a more affirmative view of women's full humanity. The body of women is the most tangible space that we share in common. And the integrity of the body is the one that grants universality to the feminist theological endeavor as it brings commonality in the search for alternatives. Together, connection and interdependence allows one to affirm that another world is possible, a world free from violence, abuse, and subordination. It is the body, the integrity of the body that we have in common, the North and the South, and the whites and the browns and the yellows and the blacks and everyone. Identity politics is bringing us down. Having so many things in common, we are allowing identity politics to keep us divided. Care for integrity of the body is a religious principle based on the understanding of the sacredness of human life. This principle is affirmed by the major religions of the world as the premise of human dignity against everything that threatens or violates this integrity. The defense of human dignity ought to be expressed by the defense and promotion of human rights. If violence against women is fundamentally understood as a violation of human rights and as a threat to the basic freedoms of women with devastating ramifications in terms of health, such violence not only causes damage to the integrity of women's bodies, but it also obliterates the sacredness inherent to the body. In her splendid article titled "Globalization and Women's Bodies in Latin America," Black feminist theologian from the Dominican Republic, Tirsa Ventura, points out that today women's movements, quote, "are discovering that our fundamental struggle is the right to be. This right centers on the freeing in a holistic sense of our body and the capacity to make decisions regarding it, being able to decide about our own lives," end of quote. According to Ventura, the defense of women's bodies necessarily involves sexuality, because the subject of sexuality cannot be absent from any reflection about the effects of globalization on women's bodies. Sexuality, Ventura asserts, is referred to the sacredness of our bodies, but also to the inherent ways in which we exist and relate to the world around us. At the same time, because, quote, "our corporal reality is the emergence of our being in the world. It is the foundation of our sense of well-being. Sexuality allows one to both make connections with those around us and open our hands to form chains of solidarity. End of quote. Freeing sexuality from the traps of injustice strengthens hope and fosters celebration of solidarity and creativity as we encounter a humanity that hungers for beauty and the pleasure of life as much as for bread and justice. A well-known fact today, with no further evidence needed, is that the agendas of the global women's movement related to women's human rights, particularly on women's sexual and reproductive rights, have found hostility on the part of the Roman Catholic Church's leadership. But this is not the only social group blocking women's rights, as they count on coalitional support from other right-wing religious and political groups. Just as Rosemary did decades ago, Rosado Núñez from Brazil has been calling attention to the impediments that the Catholic Church has placed to the recognition of the moral capacity of women to make decisions about one's own body and sexuality. I have no certainty that my friends and colleagues, the group of feminist Catholic theologians from the Global South, collectively will have the desire to advance contribution on this crucial matter, which is so much needed in our social context. But I am certain that from all global sites of struggle, the feminist theological contribution to the present processes for overcoming violence by embodying liberation can no longer silence or circumvent this issue. Courageous women in the field, such as Pat Reifer, Rosemary Redford-Ruther, Mary Hunt, Maria Jose Rosado Núñez, and many others doing work in this regard, continue to provide light and inspiration to many of us today. They keep alive the hope that another world is possible. I'm closing my reflection by saying that liberation from violence requires a sustained commitment to constructive transformation focused on the promotion of women's human rights, with a special attention to the right to sexual and reproductive health. It's a matter of health. It also demands, as Servige Montul points out, cultivation of a spirituality of liberation to give meaning and purpose to our lives. A spirituality anchored in one's body and in our daily life existence. This is a spirituality that provides support and encouragement for one's own existential commitment to change our lives, motivated by a feminist spirituality of liberation. In that promotion of women's rights and reproductive health, possibly the greatest war that Latina women face, Catholics and non-Catholics, is not the wall that President Trump wants to build to separate the interdependent people of Mexico and the U.S., but the oldest and deeper wall raised long ago by fundamentalist ecclesiastical elites to separate women from the people of God. Yeah. For feminist theologians in this setting, to serve more effectively the purpose of women's rights for full humanity and the ultimate goal of liberation for justice, our feminist theologies must be fully infused by courage, prophecy, activism, and rebellion. by doing this, we will be moving together, bringing down walls, once again, united like a flock of furious eagles. Thank you.
Dr. Aquino is willing to take some questions from the crowd. So, if there are any questions, Joy will pass around the microphone. Yes, Robin.
Or comments, reactions.
Comments,
That would be
reactions,
okay.
thoughts, testimonials.
Yeah, not necessarily, questions. Questions, yes, but also your comments, your views, your reactions.
Okay, you're fabulous. Thank you, Dr. Aquino, for that incredibly inspiring lecture. I mean, I've kind of still got chills running all over my body, especially the last section was really powerful. Thank you so much. I actually have two questions, but I don't want to hog it. So I'll ask you the more interesting sounding one first, and if it's time for the second one, I'll ask it later.
Hold the mic close.
My daughter spent last summer in Chiapas, and I actually spent a lot of time there 25 years ago or so during the beginning of the Zapatista movement and all of that stuff with the human rights organization. So I was really wanting to hear from her how things had changed or stayed the same. And she reported to me that the Zapatistas are not, I don't know how much she really knows about this, but her impression after 2 months was that the Zapatista movement, which was a movement, about the indigenous people and supporting them, is not really going anywhere right now, but what has survived out of it is a powerful feminist movement that sort of grew out of it. And she brought some images of the Guadalupe home to me. I wish I'd brought them tonight, but I didn't think of it. And one is a picture of the Guadalupe with this very powerful animal mask, which I put right over my computer every time I work. And the second is a picture of the Guadalupe in her more traditional sort of, the mandorla inside of which, she's usually positioned. But she's wearing a Zapatista mask across the bottom of her face. And she's called the Madonna, I apologize, I don't really speak Spanish, de los Barricados. And I was wondering if you'd heard of that image of the Madonna at all, and if you, your lecture gave me some ideas about what that might mean to the women of Chiapas, but I was wondering if you know anything about it yourself.
We can hear some more, but some other questions that I feel about. Yeah.
So other questions?
Or comments.
Dr. Aquino will say in comments all at the end.
I'm Mary Guitar from the Grail, and I go to the United Nations, especially for the Commission on the Status of Women. And one of the things that really disturbs me is that the corporations are included in the civil society definition. So all the kinds of things they do for manipulation is under the... So I'm interested from what you said about your comments on that. And then the other thing is about the Sustainable Development Goals, that they are really directions that women can follow and take and find colleagues with and so forth.
Other comments or questions? Janice has one.
Okay, my question is, how do we bring the secular society together with the church and vice versa?
Kirk's got one.
I'm wondering if you could just give a few words, primarily to the men that are here, so they can talk more sensibly to the men that are everyplace else. And one of the basic troubles men have, I think, is that in spite of their love for their wives, in spite of their love for their girls, there's something that makes them feel separated from them. I'm not quite sure what to call it or what it is. It seems natural in some ways to our society, and certainly from an anthropological point of view, it's not unusual in other parts of the world. I mean, other parts of the world have special roles for women, etc., but there's nothing like commonality or doing things together in the same way.
There's one last question. Joy here.
Your talk made me think about the Women's March that happened in our country just after the elections, and I'm wondering if there are similar kinds of things happening in the South, and if there is some way that the energy that I saw. We just happened to be in Orange County, so we went to Santa Ana not even knowing if there was a march, and we were overwhelmed by I don't know how many thousands of people, but you couldn't see the end of them in all directions. And a sense of our numbers was clear to us, but not yet a sense of our program and how we continue to work together.
And I wanted to access the website. Can I do that or not?
Can you access the website?
Can I access the website here? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, I think 5. Let me address these 5 topics. Okay? So we'll address these 5 topics that I have here, briefly. I want to thank you for bringing those comments that really triggered my mind, and the paper that I presented this evening, it can work out as a larger essay for publication with all notes and proper references and everything. That the paper for publication includes beautiful statements and references to the Women's March. I have been participating in the Women's March several times, and I wanted to show the website. I don't know if we can do that, or maybe no, or maybe later, when you get to your homes and then you go to the computer and just do some research on the Women's March, the statements of the Women's March. What I said here about the global justice movement, the Women's March fully informs those goals and participates in the framing of those goals, because it is a crucial part of the World Social Forum. I have participated in the opening of the World Social Forum that meets every 2 years. Different parts of the world is organized by the Women's March. And so we have met in Senegal, Dakar, Senegal, twice in Tunis, Montreal. It was this year in March, Montreal. And believe me, women and men, for that matter, women and men come together for the Women's March. Massive, massive, massive everywhere. And the upcoming forum will be in Belo Horizonte, Brazil, March 2018. And that is the space in which, by the thousands, organizations of civil society come together, feminist or not. Religions increasingly participate at the World Social Forum. So it is there where I have learned to interact with the other religious actors, Christians and non-Christians. I have learned to appreciate very much the contribution of the Islamic community, the Buddhist community, Jewish committed individuals, even Jewish who stand strong in saying, I'm Jewish and I oppose the home demolitions of Palestinians. I oppose the killing Palestinians. And they are standing there strong. And so you see Palestinians and the Jewish and the Buddhists and Islamics and Christians, Protestants and Catholics together, and there is a forum in which we engage in dialogue precisely with organizations of civil society. In all kinds of organizations, human rights, housing, the forest, care for the forest, environmental issues of environmental justice, young people, students, because it usually meets on university campuses, and so you see students by the thousands getting together in that type of setting. So thank you for bringing the Women's March in the South, also very strong. Very strong. The movement is, coming back again. Of course, there is a strong tradition of feminism in Latin America and in the Caribbean. And the Women's March, the agenda of the Women's March is very much in tune with the contemporary global justice movement, no question. Yeah, so I strongly recommend, going to their website and find out about the agenda, goals, activities, videos, resources, material, to read and do more reading about that. A few words to men. Yes, so it is very true. My perception, but I am, my point of view, as I said in the paper, is limited. It is so restricted to the world in which I move myself. That is the theological societies, the university, and connection to groups, groups working with the World Forum on Theology and Liberation. I see that when men find a cause, think about all the young Muslims that come together around a cause. The Arab Spring was possible because of the young men. By the thousands. The streets are full of young people. Tunis, the crown of the Arab Spring. And they were there at the heart of Tunis with the movements. Men fighting for freedom, and fighting for independence, fighting for democracy, they do come together. There must be a difference as well on the type of agenda that is pursued by the different groups. In the case of men, I also find this characteristic, but I am not an anthropologist, I am not a psychologist or anything like that, but at least men from the global south still keep a great deal of, in others, Eastern Europe and others in Europe, the figure of the mother. They move around the figure of the mother in general. Some cultures may develop detachment between the son and the mother, but for Mexicans, that will never happen. And for many other cultures too. So men do gather around Yeah. What I'm saying is that the cult of the mother, men do come together around the figure of the mother. And many men come together around the religious figures, as you were saying previously, around the image of the Our Ladies. They do. So I think that, to me, the point is that we women have a great deal of work to do in terms of education. How are we educating our male children, our boys and our young men? It is the responsibility of, in many ways, the primary connection that women have with their boys is through the motherhood tasks. I think that women are crucial in educating other type of values and worldview in men to develop democratic-minded men. But my experiences, again, in terms of this issue, I could tell you hundreds and hundreds of stories of students, European American students that I have had at USD. The most wonderful, the most committed, the most dedicated students to social justice. And they do come together. When there's something that is worth living, they do. Finding a goal, finding a value, finding something. And on the how do we bring together civil society and church and vice versa, the church does not belong to the state apparatus. The church ipso facto per se belongs to civil society. The churches, religions do not belong to apparatus of state. Churches and religions belong to civil society per se. So it is how the churches establish connection to the groups of civil society. So civil society, as we saw here, is ambivalent. So within civil society, you find the most conservative groups and the most racist and ultra-right people, but you also find in civil society human rights organizing, social organizing, working with the homeless, working for those who are hungry, so we find plenty in civil society initiatives. People want to do things, people want to change things. So it is how the churches connect to those organizations. In many instances, I believe that priests and pastors and rabbis and imams keep themselves very much apart with what is happening in civil society. They are attending to their own markets, their little tents. The more the churches go out and work with civil society, the more credibility they gain. Society accepts them. In Roman Catholicism, there is a reason why, and maybe I am just marked by my experience as a Latin American and a former nun. In Latin America, those who hold a very high place in civil society in terms of credibility, in terms of solidarity, in terms of trust, are the nuns. Because it is the nuns who go to the farthest and the poorest places in Latin America. It is the nuns who go and work with the Zapatistas. It is the nuns who go and work at the very remote places where nobody wants to go, the nuns go.
But it's not the priests.
Unpaid, exploited, overworked. We are indebted to the nuns. It's my deep belief. I'm here, I'm indebted to the nuns. I'm indebted to them. I became a theologian. Other vocation, but thanks to their help. So I think that nuns belong to civil society, doing the work out there silently. Never gives any attention to the nuns who go to work with the poor. And that's what they're doing. So I believe that the church needs to strengthen connection to civil society by being there, promoting programs, connections, interaction. On the Sustainable Development Goals, no question. I did not address them in my paper, but you are absolutely correct. If in the churches, again, same idea, if in the churches, in the religious groups, in our synagogues or our temples, or if we will come together and study and read what does it mean, what do they entail, and what can we do to promote those, we will be in a different situation. This is a wonderful tool of action, wonderful tool for action and for participation in civil society. I strongly recommend that. Thank you for mentioning that. There is the Sustainable Development Goals for 2030 now. For the 2000, am I right? I am, yeah, so 2030, yeah. So plenty of things to do along those lines, to work, to overcome poverty, strengthen education for girls and boys, and issues of health, and issues of several goals are involved there. There are many things that we can do along those lines. Chiapas, the Zapatista movement, I don't have much knowledge about the current state of the Zapatista movement. All I know is that they don't want, that they organized not with the goal of taking power. They could have done that, taking power in Mexico. I also know that they continue to work in the organization of people, the grassroots, the indigenous communities in Chiapas. And by the way, the nuns with whom I was are there in Chiapas. My nuns don't have colleges or hospitals, or they are not of the wealthy nuns. My nuns were those working with the poor, and that's why I entered with them. Wow. And they are in Chiapas, working with the people there in Chiapas. All I know is that the Zapatista movement created the space for women to be in power, and there are many women comandantes.
Yeah, exactly.
Las comandantes zapatistas.
Do you think that the Madonna de los Barricados possibly
Our Lady
refer to birth control?
Our Lady of the Barricadas, or rather, I don't know. Let me just put it like that. Yeah, I don't know if that is the case. But women have been very much empowered. But the Zapatista, the indigenous women leaders, and leaders of the churches in Chiapas, it is women who keep the churches alive. Catholics and Protestants and the evangelical churches too.
I believe Dr. Aquino has more than earned her glass of wine. Yes, because she still will be at the table signing copies of her book with her glass of wine. So I invite you all to come and speak with her outside and to join us for that. And also join me in thanking her one last time for that.
University